Is the microphone on? Yes, great. Dear friends, I trust you all here to create a desirable future. And thank you for joining us therefore at this little fireside chat. As a publisher, as Alexa just said, I am very interested in creating this future. And I'm very pleased to be here with our Royal Highness Constantijn van Oranje from StartupDelta. And as I said, we will have an informal conversation, but maybe it's nice to step back to the terminology fireside chat. It is not, as many of you might think, a nice way of explaining a civil conversation between people. It was a name phrased by a journalist for the radio talks President Roosevelt did in the 30s and 40s. And the reason they called it a fireside chat, because in these very difficult times between 1933 and 1944, Roosevelt used these fireside chats to keep his own population in the US informed and quiet about the very vibrant developments. So I'm very happy that we can have this conversation together, and my first question would be, before we go into the topic of the discussion, how do we get from followers to leaders? The first question is, are we in desperate times?
No, we are in uncertain times maybe, but I think we're in hopeful times. So much good stuff going on, so much new technology, but I do think it's uncertain because these technologies bring uncertainty. They change power structures, and especially in the West. The world that after the war was built on largely Western values and a multilateral system is now being slowly unraveled. And so in the West, I think we feel a lot of that uncertainty. But in other parts of the world, when you travel a bit, you find that there's a lot of hope.
And as we know, you travel quite a lot, not a little bit. Can you explain to the audience what StartupDelta is doing for startups, and can you give us some examples?
So basically, we do everything we can to make the Netherlands the best place to start a business, to grow, to scale and internationalize and exit. And we looked at what companies need. They need talent, they need capital, they need networks, they need technology, and they need markets. So basically we looked at what was lacking in the Netherlands and we tried to address that.
And can you give us some examples?
So there's things like the taxes on options for salary, which not well organized yet in the Netherlands, which we're trying to deal with. There are things like tax incentives to attract angel investment. There are things like startup visa, enlarging those so we get attracting more talent to the Netherlands. But it's also supporting companies to go abroad. We're a small country, small market, so it's very important that we connect to the places where a lot of that innovation is happening, and we help our companies to internationalize faster. So we were, for instance, we're at CES with 50 Dutch startups, and so we select them, we support them, we help them with their meetings, and then we celebrate their successes.
And were there successes in CES already, immediately?
Yeah, we had a few contracts signed and a lot of media attention, but it was quite cool because we had a flying car and we had blockchain solutions. We had actually medical, quite specialized stuff. So it's a very diverse group of startups, and attracting also a very diverse group of potential partners, investors, and media.
Many of you in the audience might not know, but we are quite proud that the Netherlands are the #2 on the Global Innovation Index. Which so a small country can be quite successful in innovating. Why are the Netherlands so high on this innovation index? And we even increased one position since 2017. So apparently we're doing something really good.
Well, what's really remarkable is that Switzerland is #1. And they don't have a harbor, they don't have natural resources. They speak 3 languages, so have a very complex governance structure, all of that. And they're still #1. So that's kind of hopeful for everyone. So it's really what you make of it. And the Netherlands has some strong assets. So we have our location is good, central in terms of logistics. We have the biggest harbor of Europe, biggest airport, so well-connected English-speaking population. All our universities are in the top 200 in research and in education. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for the Netherlands. Very good IT infrastructure, road infrastructure. So, but it's also just a benchmark, right? There are so many of these benchmarks, and actually it's more challenging if you're second, because everybody says things are going really well. I think my biggest challenge is that we need to create a sense of urgency, that what did us well for the past is not going to automatically do us well for the future. And these benchmarks can have this kind of lulling feeling that everything is going very smooth, and the politicians then sometimes forget that they have to invest forward, especially as so many technologies are hitting their kind of exponential moment where they will have a huge impact on the future competitiveness of our society and the economy.
We will be discussing what it requires to become a leader. Is innovation important in becoming a leader?
Well, innovation is important not to become a loser. I think if you don't innovate, then the biggest leader will become a loser quite fast. And I think it's particularly important that you acknowledge that your current model is probably not going to sustain to the future. So you have to keep actively seeking out the innovation. And on the other hand, a follower is not a bad position to be in, right? And I hope for the German car industry, when you look at Tesla, that kind of following, if you pick up the pace, that you can actually overtake once you kind of got it right. So following, many really good strategies have been following. Because you create a new market, like Volkswagen, when they came on, they were creating or supplying to a market that was not supplied by the big car brands, but it was huge, and the Japanese did that afterwards, and then the Koreans and the Chinese are doing it now. So following is not a bad strategy, at least if you're agile enough, and if you got your processes right, and if you can, once you've achieved to catch up, that you can then overtake.
Okay, and we were specifically talking about the digital side of the world. How do you define the leaders and followers in the digital age? Is that the same as with the car companies, or is that a different perspective?
Well, usually the guy or girl that's winning and is making a lot of money is the kind of the leader, and the rest are the followers. But no, I think what makes a difference is that in the digital age you have the opportunity now to create new markets, and these actors can come by stealth. So nobody in the taxi industry or the quintessential hotel industry of Airbnb or Uber saw them coming, because they were actually addressing a new market. And for Uber, that was 2 million or how many chauffeurs that were not addressed, and bringing new cars on the road. But that actually, so the leadership is really in addressing a need of the customer in a completely different way, and creating a market that wasn't there before. And then a lead can at least emerge from out of nowhere. Otherwise, if you're basically just creating another car which looks fancier or is relatively incremental and not changes fundamentally how people are moved or how people are actually transporting themselves, then you're competing head-on with very, very sophisticated, optimized companies that are most likely going to beat you. Even if you have a better battery or you have something that feels superior to you, you're not really changing the game, and then leadership will come at a very, very hard cost.
Now in the platform industry, there's some comments about this kind of leadership. If you take everything winner takes all, that has also some negative aspects, and there's more discussion about that. Does that give new opportunities for European companies, or?
Well, it's quite fair to say that we missed out completely on the platform economy. We missed out on the internet. We had very dominant telcos that were celebrating the successes of mobile telephony, and thought that this kind of best effort internet was never going to compete with them. I was in meetings in 2003 with the telco industry, where they thought that voice over IP was never going to compete with them because the quality was so bad, and you see where that went. So yeah, Yeah.
So if you look at, we defined a little bit how leaders and followers are. What can followers, if we would say Europe is following these platforms, what can we do to make sure that we become leaders?
I think we have to. So platform economy is really important, and there's the next paradigm is already coming with, edge technologies and decentralization. So, and then, I'm sure that in 5 or 10 years' time, nobody's talking about platforms or platforms in a different way. And so there is a next paradigm. So we shouldn't be building the next Google or not building the next Amazon. Yeah, just checking if you were looking. You were on your phone, so no, thank you. But
keep focused, eh?
No, and I must say with Amazon, which I find that's an amazing company, and what they have done is actually capturing a vertical. We've been so many people and startups have been building platforms, and then you have a platform and you're solving a market problem, but nobody's coming to your market because you're building a marketplace here and they're all there. But actually getting the people on your platform and then providing some kind of a superior value sometimes means that you actually have to do all this stuff. It's not just bringing them together. And that we've not been doing enough of. And yes, Spotify has done it, and a number of places we're seeing that happening. So if we really want to play a part in that economy, you have to actually deliver superior value to the end customer. And it means that you have to probably provide a service that is further integrated than just the platform.
And we shouldn't let people like Werner leave us then.
Of course, we know. I mean, he's been great. I mean, he's been. Amazon has invested a lot also in Europe. He's gone around. He comes to conferences like this and tells about the great stuff that's been happening there. I don't think that we should stop anyone from leaving. We should build the places where people want to go. So if we have a superior setup, because you can find capital, you can find bright people, you have an environment where people actually want to live, they'll come to you. And we've seen that, and I really recommend everybody that that has anything to do with ecosystems, especially at the city level, to read the book on Startup City. It was written by the guys who did this in Amsterdam, and it shows that you can do in a relatively limited time with a focused approach. You can create an environment where people actually do want to go, where capital does flow, and where businesses do emerge. So. And it's just very hard work, but it's possible, but it just needs dedication.
You have traveled a lot. You worked with a lot of startups. You go a lot abroad. What are the rules for exceptional companies? If we look at this audience, what do you see as the key rules that become exceptional companies with?
Well, I think exceptional companies are those companies that stay exceptional over longer periods of time. So it means that they have a value set and a focus that allows them to innovate and to stay on top of the things. So it's obviously brilliant if you build a company like Uber that scales in such a limited time to a global company which is valued over 100 millions. But I think the really interesting companies are those that can actually retain their competitiveness over time. And that requires, so as I said, strong values, also high degrees of trust in your people, investment in your people, a very clear focus on the customer and what the customer needs are, and not the proxy. Very many companies are basically serving a proxy of what they think the customer is or wants, but they don't really understand what the value is that they're providing to the customer. So companies that manage to do that and do that over time can be highly successful, and we've seen many of those. I mean, you've seen companies in Europe. People always talk about the failure of Nokia, for instance. But Nokia is an incredible company, how it's reinvented itself. And when they had this kind of near-death experience because of the handset business went from 40% market share in the world to nearly none, they reinvented themselves. They sold off the maps business. They now have an infrastructure business consolidated with Siemens, and they're now again a really big company. In the meantime, they've spun out so many people that have created new businesses and have made Helsinki and also Estonia into startup hotspots, and that's really to quite a degree due to Nokia.
If you look at what are the successful examples in your view of successful European companies that can lead this kind of thinking?
Well, on the new side, I really like companies like Picnic that have taken on it's a food retailer from the Netherlands and also in Germany, because they take on a really difficult industry where with cutthroat competition, very low margin, they still dare to enter this market and do it really ambitiously and big time. So from terms of entrepreneurship, I deeply respect that. When it comes to companies that are that I respect that are more mature, I think well, I mentioned kind of the flexibility that Nokia had, but actually in my country, a company like ASML, which has managed to become basically the dominant global leader in lithography machines. So they're right in the beginning of the whole value chain when it comes to semiconductors and chips. And they've managed to place a few really important strategic bets, and they were existential, and so very entrepreneurial, and have now established themselves as a 30-year-old company, and are still at the forefront of innovation. And I think that's highly respected, and they're doing that in a relatively small town, Veldhoven in Eindhoven. They're really investing in their environment to get talent to come there, and the talent is so hard to find. That they go to Korea and everywhere, and they manage to get these people, and they're still in the Netherlands, and they're still building world-class stuff.
Mm-hmm. Steffi and Alexandra said, we are in uncertain times, but we need courage. What kind of courage do we need? What is the courage that we should...
I believe courage is an everyday thing. It's in everyday little decisions when you decide to either reach further than you would otherwise do, go out of your comfort zone. So I think it takes courage to explore who you can be and not who you are. So, and I think that we all have noticed this with people when they meet hardship, suddenly they can do extraordinary things. Why is it that we don't try to do these extraordinary things without the hardship? So that really requires courage, because you have to force yourself to go further. I think it's also courage to trust yourself and go against the grain and against the masses, and that's difficult. Even social media, just stand up for an idea, and you'll be slaughtered. And maybe it's more important to stand up for your idea than the fear of being slaughtered. So courage, I think, is something. It's an attitude, and it's very different than being brave. Because courage, I think, is sensitive and intelligent, and brave, I think, is heroic and stupid.
Thank you. We have time for 1 or 2 questions. Is there anybody, or Werner, who would like to comment on what we were discussing, or a question? No? Do you want to comment, Werner?
Okay, I'll take one. Not necessarily about Amazon, but also about the previous panel. What are the unique things that we as Europeans have that nobody else has? I mean, we always think about sort of comparing ourselves to other countries or to other successful nations. If I look at Southeast Asia, for example, entrepreneurship is flourishing there. Why? Because their parents were entrepreneurs. Not entrepreneurs, they had a bookshop, or they had a shoe shop, or whatever. And you see that businesses that are being built there are all being built as a sustainable business which they would like to do for the rest of their life. Not a billion-dollar business. So what are the kind of things that we have here in Europe? If you think about courage and optimism, what are the unique things we have here in Europe that nobody else has? I mean, Americans speak one language. If you get published in the New York Times, everybody reads you. Here, if you get published in the Frankfurter Allgemeine, nobody in England will care. So what are the kind of things we have here in Europe that will make us unique as entrepreneurs? We're much better at, I think, worldwide business. We have to deal with, here in Europe, with 27 different tax systems, different import rules, all these kind of things. So what are the things that make us unique in terms of entrepreneurs that will make us much more successful than the Americans ever can be?
So that's already, I think you gave a few of the answers to your own questions. I also think that Europe, we have to, well, if we can get our cake and eat it too, then we are the happiest continent in the world, right? I mean, we have a balanced society. We have, in at least large part of this of the continent, we have limited levels of corruption. We have social welfare states. We have education for free. We basically have the society that we would really like to have. We care about the environment. We're cleaning all that up, and blah blah blah. The challenge is, and this is really a challenge for the Netherlands as well, is we don't have this sense of urgency because it's all going too well. Why would you take the risk of becoming an entrepreneur? Why would you take the risk of going against vested interest because things are going so well? And I think that's, if we manage to do that, and it should not be difficult. It is much easier to build on a country that is second innovating country in the world to go further and bring entrepreneurs to the next level than it is if you're somewhere in Africa, or you are maybe even in Asia, if you are Vietnam or whatever, and you have an income level that's totally uncomparable. Still, we need to build that drive and need to invest in the entrepreneurs, because they will drive the technology forward, and they will build the companies, and they will create the wealth of the future. But to tap into that potential. Also in this country is so well organized, but to unleash that innovation talent and to not over bureaucratize or not set so many rules, and that and also the European community, we set these rules for consumer protection. It's all great, but it is actually limiting us now, and we should have certain clauses where we call them sunset clauses. That we developed the GDPR. Fine, it's known, it's important, you protect privacy, it's really important. But we also know that we didn't know how to do this really. We also know that we started this in 2010 when AI was not an issue yet. And now we have a GDPR, we have AI, we have deep machine learning, and we're seeing that China has all the data, and America, the companies have all the data, and they're going massively fast, and Europe sits in the middle. And what we don't want to become is the museum of the world with the happiest people for the while it takes, but the Chinese are not going to subsidize our healthcare systems or education systems. So we have to start doing this ourselves, and it means that we also have to have the guts and the politicians to create the space where entrepreneurship is possible, including in data.
Thank you.